I've got my pattern for the moccasin chukka boot and have drawn around the pattern onto this piece of kind of rusty nubuck. It's actually an upholstery scrap, and so I'll cut it out along the silver line that you see, and then I'll cut out lining. This is the pattern for the upper, or the vamp, I guess, without the lining, and then when I do the lining, I'll add this 1 inch or almost an inch border to that, and then I'll have my lining ready too. The cement on the lining has dried as well as on the upper, so I'm going to try to do my very best job of hovering over this, trying to get it nicely lined up. And I think I did it. I'll cut the lining out to match, but what I wanted was to have the cement on the lining that's going to fold over. I wanted to have that in the right place. So before I cut this all out, I'm going to put some cement along here so that when I fold the lining over, it will stay in place. Then I'll be ready to cut the whole thing out and cut out the vamp, or cut out the plug also. I have the plug of the chukka moccasin cut out. Now I need to make the stitching holes in it, and I've just about completed cutting out the body of the moccasin. So I'm cutting out these edges to fold over of the lining. I applied cement to the bottom of the moccasin, and I'm experimenting with putting a little bigger sole on than I usually do. I'm using this natural rubber soling, and I'd like to see whether it works to kind of have that curve up so that the stitches along the edge are off of the floor. So we'll soon find out if that works. I'm punching the holes at the back of the heel, the ones that are around the base of the heel, which are shown on the pattern, and I've already punched the holes around up here. And I'll do something a little different when I stitch up the back of the heel, so I'll be back to show you that. Now I went along here with the 3-pronged thonging chisel to make equidistant marks along the edge, but to be able to do this whip stitch, I have to have stitching holes made here too, and I can't just use this same chisel because the circumference is smaller in here than it is out there, so I'd start to get extra, or fewer I guess, slits inside than I needed. So I have to use the 1 prong and go around and make a slit under every one that I see on the outside. So this is just a good time to do some deep breathing exercises and take it easy and just take your time. Go around here. Now when you get the stitching slits matched up from the layer that goes through the rubber and the layer that doesn't, then you're ready to stitch. So I've got a piece of artificial sinew. It's really strong, so I chose it for that reason, and the way that it kind of goes flat, I like that too. I took one of the strands out so it's just a little bit thinner, and I put a harness needle on it. And so to stitch, I'm making these stitches go diagonally, so I poke in, and I'll try to keep my hand out of the way here, the next outside slit, and I can see easily from the back side where that next slit is. That's right below it. And then, so I've made a stitch that kind of has a diagonal slant to it, and then I'm going to pull it really nice and tight so that this sole will be gathered up and not loose under your foot. So I'll keep on making those slits alongside the sole, on the sole with the single chisel punch, and then whip stitching, pulling the threads tight with the artificial sinew. I want to do a couple of stitches, the whip stitches, with a little more of a close-up. So there's my diagonal line there. You can see on the back side, I can easily check and see that I haven't missed a slit. So I'll poke it down through the one directly below it. And as usual, having a pair of pliers, a little pair of pliers is handy. Something like this to help you pull if you need it. I'm ready for this pretty exciting phase of stitching the plug to the vamp of the chukka boot. So I'm starting, I have 33 holes I've checked on both around the plug and around the edge of the vamp. And so I go in the holes number 1 with a harness needle. I've got a harness needle on both ends of this waxy thread, and just for the first 2 stitches I'll stitch over the edge a few times. You usually do see this on moccasins, and then I'll even out the ends of the threads. So I've gone over that top edge. I think I'll go over it 2 times. And then I'm going to, I'll do one more stitch with the, I guess my hand's in the way there. So I've gone twice over that edge. Then I'll do the same thing in the next stitch. So I'll go into the next hole on the plug and the next hole on the body, called the vamp. And then a couple of times over that edge with this thread. Pull it nice, real tight. I've done all the work so far with one thread, and now it's ready to use both threads. So I take the other harness needle and come back up through that hole. And pull tight again. And that's the way I'm going to continue, is a stitch down, and then in the next stitch on the body of the sandal. Pull one thread through one direction, the other thread through from the other direction. And then give both threads a very strong pull. We really want the body, the vamp part, to gather up, because you can see it looks amazing to think that we could, around this little distance, we're going to attach this all the way around. So several times during the process I get a scared feeling in my stomach that how could this possibly work, but then when it all works out, it looks really nice and smooth. It's pretty exciting. I've stitched all the way around. I'm down to hole number 32 out of 33, so it's pretty exciting. It's also pretty exciting how it came together, and I think my experiment with the wider sole made out of the natural rubber is going to work, because that looks pretty good. I was concerned it would kind of deform the shape of the moccasin, but so I'm doing those couple of times over the top edge stitches, so it'll be the same. So there's one. Each time that after a while, my hands started really feeling some pain in the little finger as I kept pulling these two stitches each time, so I started putting a glove on, but I could just do it for the time that I pulled, and then I had to take them off when I was doing the stitch. And here's my last stitch. So it's all gathered, and after I take it over one more time, I'm going to tie the two ends together with the square knot and then run them under the channel, and then the stitching of the top line will be complete. So, ready to do the heel. I copied the stitching holes from the pattern, excuse me, 5 on each side there and then 10 here. So these from the sole get gathered up, and I'm going to use the X and a bar stitch to first stitch this seam closed. So I'm using double-sided tape, and this way when I make holes through one surface I can make them through the other at the same time. So I'll lay this exactly on top, as exact as I can, and then I'll punch the stitching holes. I use the wing divider to make a line, and then on that line I'll use my thonging chisel when I get these holes, these slits made. I'll show you how to do the X and bar stitch. I'm ready to make the X and a bar stitch to stitch up the back of the heel. So I took a piece of thread, cut it 8 times the length of the area that I'm going to stitch, and I whipped it around the top. It has a harness needle at each end, and now I'm going to make an X. And an X is going to have 2 legs, and I'm going to make the first leg now. You notice I'm putting the X's on the inside of this moccasin. That's because the stitching on the outside is going to be covered up by a heel cover, so the X is maybe a little bit nicer looking stitch and doesn't have quite as many bars across, so it might be more comfortable. So I've made 1 leg of my X, and the secret to doing this stitch correctly is to bring your thread right back up always in the slit that's directly across from the one you went in. So now I'll make my other leg. So I go in this hole, the slit that my other thread just came out of, and again I'm going to go right back across, because as you remember, or I guess you haven't seen that yet, but I get 3 bars made on the back. So I take whichever thread is in my hand at the end and go from across to make a bar stitch at the bottom. But I'm going to go on down through here making these little hourglass looking shapes. I finished with the X and bar stitch, and want to pound these stitches so that they won't be felt inside the mock. So this is one of the things that this little anvil is good for. Getting all the way down into that tight spot. Now this stitching is going to be covered by a heel support piece that will then get stitched, the base of it will get stitched down here in this area. I'm cutting this piece to go up the back of the heel, and deciding how wide I want it. That looks like a good width. So I'll put cement on that, on the moccasin in the area where this will end up, and then stitch both sides of it. I'm going to put this heel support piece along here, and since it's a straight thing, it's easy to just use double-sided tape to hold it momentarily while I make the stitching slits along it. So it'll be stitched right away. So I'll put a strip of this on both sides. Hope that it comes off easily. And rub it in with the scissors. Go under the lining. Bring this down, check that it seems to be halfway. Half of the support on each side of the heel seam. Then I'm going to cut this off so it'll match this lower seam. So now I'll stitch this all together. I'll punch the stitching slits with the thonging chisel, and I just use a simultaneous running stitch. I'm going to go up one side, across, and then down the other. I've cut this strip of lining to put over the edge, and then I will punch stitching holes and stitch it so that there's no seam here at the back of the heel. And to get it the correct and even distance here, if you can see this, I have a silver pen mark that I made with my compass to show me how far down that should go all along the edge, and I've tried to follow along that, and now I'm working my way over to the other side where I'm lining it up with that edge. I want this edge to be about 3/4 of an inch wide, so that means I'm making the inside about an inch, so that it would be a little longer, like 1/4 of an inch longer, so I'd be sure and catch it in the top stitching. And going over the top takes a little bit of like 1/8 of an inch as well. So 3/4 and 1 inch, so it's 1 3/4 plus 1/8, so it's like 1 7/8. Kind of stretch it, you could probably just get by with 1 3/4, because you don't want too much either, then you have to cut it off afterwards. So now I'm doing that same thing of trying to get it adhered evenly. So I'm kind of starting in the middle, then I'll use this again. This is wide, so I'm going to have to trim some of it off after I've stitched. So let's say 1 3/4 max if you're using this size. If you're making this size boot. This is the size 9. Okay, so I've got that all down in place, and I think I need to use my little cutting pad here, and I'll do the same of using the wing dividers to make a crease, show me where the stitching line is. Use the thonging chisel, and of course I'll start here at the end with that. So I'll continue with this, and when I have all my stitching slits made, then I'll use the simultaneous running stitch all along that edge. I really think this is the preferred way to do this. Looks much nicer there, do not have any seam there at the back. And that leaves one thing to show you here, and that is how to stitch this. I'm going to use the simultaneous running stitch for that too. So I'll get my thread cut that will be maybe 4 times the length of this distance, maybe, it's a small distance, so maybe 5 or 6 times, so I have enough thread to work with, and it's kind of thick. And start the simultaneous running stitch, and then I'll come back and show you how that looks. I've stitched almost all the way across here. So here's one needle coming out, and the other one going down in that same hole. That's how the simultaneous running stitch works. When I get to my last hole, then I'll tie both ends together with a square knot. So you have to kind of gather this little piece from the bottom is a little more lengthy than the piece above it. So you have to gather it a little bit as you go on. So there's my final stitch, and I'll probably find a place where I can tie a square knot. Maybe that won't be seen, probably tuck it real close to the edge here, and left over right and right over left, and then I'll tuck these two ends in. I'm going to check first that I've got that well hidden. So once I complete the stitching here, then this moccasin will be completed. For the thong that closes the chukka boot, I need to make 2 holes in one side for the end of the thong, and then on the other side that I will use to stitch through to the button. So I copied the location of the marks from the pattern, and I'll be punching them out with a drive punch. And then I'll make little smaller holes on the other side for the button to be attached to. Here's the completed moccasin. I cut a strip of the bull hide. There's 2 holes punched on this side that the thong goes through and then gets knotted below this button. And this is a piece of horn I had. So there it is. This is how you inside stitch a moccasin. The most important thing is that you find the center point of the plug as well as the vamp. So I've got that marked here, and I start by, I've got a thread with a needle at each end, and I go in through that hole that's the center, and then I go through the hole that's the center here. On the vamp, I go through the next hole, and I find the next hole here, and then I'm doing pretty much a simultaneous running stitch. I'm going in and out and in and out with one thread, as well as going in and out with the other one. And I'll get my threads evened in length. And I'm going to give a good tug on those stitches. Then I go in the next hole, holding the thread that's already in the hole over to the edge. Make sure I don't miss the hole. Now, do one more stitch. So that would be 3 stitches completed. So there's my 3 stitches. Pulling each time is going to be gathering the vamp up. If I kept at that, I would have a hard time stitching in this direction. So to make this work, you have 2 threads with a needle at both ends, and one of your threads is working to the inside of the foot, the other thread is working towards the outside of the foot. And you can just do maybe 4 stitches max in one direction before you need to go and catch up stitching in the other direction. I'm going back in that exact hole of the center. Yep, that's it. So I'll leave these threads alone for now. Now I'm heading towards the outside of the foot. And I'll even these threads out also. Okay, so going in the next hole this direction on both pieces and back in with this thread, pull. That's a typical moccasin kind of gathering. Yep, this is the next hole. And then hold that thread out of the way, go through that same hole with the other thread. Give a tug. Now this way I can go maybe 6 or 7 stitches because that's really, I'm just catching up, and then I can go a little bit ahead each time. So each time you do a catch up and then a little progress. So I'll do 6 stitches in this direction before I stop and go back in the other direction. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. You want to be really careful, as you can imagine, that you don't miss holes. The whole project could be in vain. You have to take the whole thing out. Okay, then this other thread, other end, that's 5 stitches. And then I'll do 6. And stop. Stop going in this direction and head back to the original. Holding the thread out of the way. Pulling hard. And then putting those threads aside, taking back up with these. So I'll do maybe 4 stitches in this direction. This gets a little easier once you get to the straightaway on the sides, but it's here in the toe that well, it's most mysterious of how do you do this. And this is the mystery revealed. I have a similar process where you can make a regular flat shoe that is stitched a lot like this, so that your shoe will look like it's a fully lasted shoe. There'll be no turned out edge. Now, some of the websites that are on my resource page, no, I guess they're on, I'm not sure. I'll have to check it. But okay, I think you got the idea. When I get down here to the end of the plug, then I'll stop and show you again what's happening. I've stitched the plug to the vamp. I put this last in there, so it would, I'd wet it inside here and put the last in so it would stretch it to its fullest volume. And now I'm just going to do the simultaneous running stitch along each edge. So the same, one thread in one direction, the other in the other direction until I get back here to the heel. As I'm stitching along here, I'm going to pull the stitch each time. Just a little tug on both threads to tighten this up, because this is where a shoe can be baggy. So you can totally control that by gathering as you stitch. I stitched all the way back to the heel on the inside of the shoe, and on the outside also. You can see how I kind of puckered it up, or kind of gathered it as I went. And so now I'm ready to do this seam and I'll be finished. So the top thread I'll wrap around a few times. One of these threads is a lot longer than the other, so that's the one I'll use for the wrapping around. And now I'll do the simultaneous running stitch down this side. When I get to the bottom, I'll tie a square knot in here, like I did on this side, and then wrap the ends of the thread around a couple of stitches and then clip them off. So the next thing you'll see will be the completed shoe. Here's the completed flat on my foot. You can see how I finished stitching, kind of gathered this up a little bit, stitched down here, made the square knot. So I wish I had done some embellishment on this piece before I stitched it together, but I'll do that on the next pair. You can see the back of the heel. It all looks good, and it's very comfortable back there with no stitching at the back of the heel.